The phrase, "What happened to Gerard Butler at 55? Try not to cry when you see." This suggests a dramatic downfall, as if a single tragic event suddenly altered the course of his life. In reality, nothing happened in the sensational sense. What audiences are reacting to is a far more universal and uncomfortable truth: aging. Especially when it happens to someone once idealized as physically invincible. Gerard Butler rose to global fame through roles that emphasized raw physicality and masculine dominance. Most notably, King Leonidas in 300. That image, hypermuscular, relentless, almost mythological, became permanently embedded in popular memory. However, it was never a sustainable baseline. It was the result of extreme training, strict dieting, dehydration, and cinematic illusion, all designed for a single moment in TV. Expecting that image to persist, unchanged into one's mid-50 seconds, reflects more about audience psychology than about Butler he himself. At 55, Butler's appearance has naturally changed. His face shows signs of age. His physique is less aggressively sculpted, and his overall presence is calmer, heavier, and more grounded. For some viewers, this contrast triggers shock or sadness, not because Butler looks unhealthy or defeated, but because he no longer matches the frozen version of him they carry in their minds. The emotional response is rooted in loss, not of his career, but of a symbol of youth. Importantly, Butler's aging is compounded by the physical cost of his profession. Unlike many actors who rely heavily on stunt doubles, Butler repeatedly subjected his body to high-impact action roles. Over the years, he has endured significant injuries, including back problems that required surgery. These are cumulative consequences, not sudden failures. When the body has been used as a professional instrument for decades, visible wear is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of sustained effort. Media narratives often ignore this context. Instead, they frame aging as decline and change as tragedy. Titles urging viewers to try not to cry are designed to manufacture grief, implying that Butler has lost something essential. Yet, what has actually changed is not his value, but his phase of life. He has transitioned from peak physical spectacle to longevity-focused career management, choosing roles that are less punishing and more sustainable. The discomfort audiences feel is intensified by identification. Gerard Butler is close in age to many viewers who grew up watching Haim. Seeing Haim age confronts them with their own mortality and fading youth. The sadness, therefore, is reflexive and personal. Butler becomes a mirror rather than a victim. In truth, there is no tragedy in a man reaching 55 with his career intact, his autonomy preserved, and his life ongoing. The real issue lies in a culture that romanticizes eternal youth and treats natural aging as something to mourn. Gerard Butler did not fall. He moved forward. The tears, if any, belong not to his story, but to the myths audiences are reluctant to let go. Beyond the surface-level shock of aging, the deeper story behind Gerard Butler at 55 lies in the physical and psychological toll of a career built on intensity. For decades, Butler's professional identity was closely tied to strength, endurance, and a willingness to push his body beyond reasonable limits. That commitment brought fame and financial success, but it also came with consequences that are rarely acknowledged in emotional, click-driven narratives. Action cinema rewards excess. Actors are praised for training harder, taking greater risks, and appearing indestructible on screen. Butler embodied this expectation. From 300 to the Has Fallen franchise, he repeatedly performed in physically punishing conditions. Over time, these demands resulted in chronic injuries, most notably serious back issues that required surgery and long-term rehabilitation. Recovery from such injuries in one's 50 seconds is not comparable to recovery at 30. The body adapts more slowly, pain lingers longer, and limitations become permanent rather than temporary. However, framing this reality as something sad fundamentally misunderstands resilience. Butler did not collapse under these pressures. He adapted. Instead of chasing the same extreme physical transformation that defined his early fame, he recalibrated his approach to work. This shift is often misread as decline, when in fact it reflects experience and self-preservation. Choosing longevity over spectacle is not surrender. It is strategy. Equally significant, though less visible, is the psychological dimension of this transition. Butler has spoken openly about periods of mental strain, stress, and the challenge of maintaining balance in an industry that rewards constant output and public visibility. These struggles are not anomalies. They are common among performers whose self-worth becomes intertwined with physical performance and external validation. Acknowledging them requires maturity, not weakness. What many emotional videos fail to recognize is that reinvention is one of the most demanding phases of any career. Letting go of an identity that once defined success is profoundly difficult. For Butler, that identity was the unstoppable action hero. Moving beyond it means accepting different roles, different expectations, and, critically, a different relationship with his audience. This process can look quiet from the outside, but it requires internal strength that surpasses physical power. There is also a cultural bias at play. Male actors are often celebrated for aging gracefully only if they maintain an illusion of youthful dominance. When that illusion fades, the narrative quickly turns mournful or dismissive. Butler's case exposes this double standard. He is neither irrelevant nor broken. He is simply no longer performing youth as a permanent act. The emotional pull of try not to cry storytelling depends on presenting survival as loss. Yet, survival is the achievement. Butler remains active, selective, and professionally autonomous in an industry that discards many far earlier. His continued presence is not a footnote to past glory. It is evidence of adaptation. At 55, Gerard Butler represents not the end of strength, but a redefinition of it. Strength becomes restraint, wisdom, and endurance rather than spectacle. If there is emotion to be found in his story, it should not be sorrow, but respect for a man who absorbed the cost of his choices and chose to continue on his own terms. The emotional reaction provoked by titles like What Happened to Gerard Butler at 55, Try Not to Cry When You See, this reveals less about Gerard Butler's life and more about the audience consuming the narrative. The sense of loss people feel is not rooted in factual decline, but in psychological projection. Viewers are responding to the disappearance of an image that once symbolized certainty, power, and youth qualities many unconsciously fear losing themselves. Celebrity culture trains audiences to freeze individuals in time. When an actor reaches iconic status, a specific version of them becomes immortalized. For Gerard Butler, that version is the warrior king of 300, carved, commanding, and seemingly ageless. Any deviation from that image is perceived as damage rather than evolution. Aging, which is neutral and inevitable, is reframed as failure. The discomfort viewers feel arises when reality breaks the illusion they were promised. Media manipulation amplifies this reaction. Algorithms reward content that triggers emotion, particularly sadness and nostalgia. By juxtaposing old footage with current appearances, creators manufacture a before and after contrast designed to provoke grief. Music, pacing, and selective framing all contribute to the illusion that something precious has been lost. In truth, nothing was taken away. Time simply moved forward. This tactic works because aging confronts people with a truth they would rather avoid. Watching someone famous grow older forces viewers to acknowledge their own mortality and physical limits. Gerard Butler becomes a stand-in for a shared human experience. The tears are not for Chaim, but for the viewer's younger self, the version of life that felt open-ended and full of physical certainty. There is also a deeper cultural anxiety surrounding masculinity. Butler's early appeal was rooted in physical dominance and stoicism. When that dominance softens, audiences struggle to recalibrate their understanding of masculine value. Popular culture offers few models of male worth that are not tied to strength, speed, or visual power. As a result, maturity and restraint are misread as loss rather than transformation. Ironically, this misinterpretation diminishes the very resilience people claim to admire. Enduring injury, navigating mental strain, and remaining professionally active into one's mid-50 seconds require qualities that are far less visible but far more sustainable than raw physical force. Yet, these traits do not fit neatly into viral narratives. They lack spectacle, and therefore, they lack clicks. The framing of Butler's current life as something to mourn is ultimately a refusal to accept the full arc of human development. Growth does not stop at youth. It changes form. What is fading is not relevance, but fantasy. The real tragedy would be a man destroying his health to preserve an illusion for strangers. Butler's decision to move forward instead reflects clarity, not defeat. In the end, Gerard Butler's story at 55 is not about what was lost, but about what remains. Experience, autonomy, and perspective replace excess and bravado. The sadness audiences feel is understandable, but misplaced. Aging is not an erasure of value. It is a redistribution of it. If there is a lesson in this narrative, it is not to try, not to cry, but to learn how to look at aging without fear. Gerard Butler did not disappear. He simply became real, and reality, unlike myth, is allowed to change. When a public figure reaches their mid-50 seconds, the conversation often shifts from achievement to aftermath. In Gerard Butler's case, this shift has been framed by outsiders as a quiet, fading, rather than an intentional evolution. Yet legacy is not defined by how long one can preserve a peak eye image. It is defined by how effectively one navigates what comes after it. At 55, Butler's career offers a case study in endurance, recalibration, and self-authorship. Hollywood has a long history of celebrating beginnings and sensationalizing endings, but it struggles with the middle ground of longevity. Actors are expected either to remain frozen in their most profitable form or to exit the spotlight dramatically. Butler has done neither. Instead, he occupies a less glamorous but far more difficult space, sustained relevance without illusion. He continues to work, not as a cultural obsession, but as a professional with agency over his choices. This phase of his life highlights a different kind of courage. Early in his career, physical risk was part of his brand. Now, restraint is knowing when not to push the body further, when to decline certain roles, and when to accept visible change requires self-awareness that is rarely celebrated. Yet these decisions protect not only his health, but the integrity of his future. Legacy, built on self-destruction, rarely survives scrutiny. There is also an important distinction between fame and respect. Fame thrives on novelty and excess. Respect grows from consistency and survival. Butler's continued presence in film reflects trust from studios and audiences alike. He may no longer dominate headlines, but he remains bankable, recognizable, and reliable, qualities that sustain long careers far more effectively than temporary spectacle. At 55, Butler also represents a counter-narrative to cultural panic around aging. His story challenges the assumption that value diminishes with physical decline. Instead, it suggests that value migrates. Experience replaces intensity. Judgment replaces impulsiveness. These shifts are subtle, but they matter, particularly in an industry that often treats maturity as an inconvenience rather than an asset. The emotional framing of his life as something to grieve overlooks a critical truth. Survival with autonomy is success. Many actors from Butler's generation did not manage their transitions as effectively. Some vanished, others burned out, and some remained trapped in performances that no longer served them. Butler avoided these outcomes not by clinging to the past, but by allowing he himself to outgrow it. Ultimately, legacy is not measured by how closely one resembles their former self, but by whether they remain whole as time advances. Gerard Butler at 55 is not a symbol of loss. He is a reminder that continuity is possible without stagnation. His career no longer demands worship, and that is precisely its strength. If audiences are willing to look beyond manufactured sadness, they will see a man who chose sustainability over self-mythologizing. That choice may not invite tears, but it deserves recognition. In a culture obsessed with perpetual youth, Gerard Butler's real legacy may be far more radical, demonstrating that aging without apology is not a failure, but a form of quiet success. The final layer of the narrative surrounding Gerard Butler at 55 is not about his career, his body, or even the media's portrayal of him. It is about acceptance, both his and the audience's. The discomfort that fuels emotional headlines exists because myths are easier to love than people. Myths do not age, do not adapt, and do not disappoint. People do all three, and therein lies their depth. For many viewers, Gerard Butler was never simply an actor. He represented a moment in time when strength felt uncomplicated and masculinity appeared absolute. That image offered reassurance. If such power could exist, perhaps it could be sustained. Aging disrupts that fantasy. When Butler appears older, heavier, or less aggressive, the myth collapses, and the viewer is left confronting reality without the buffer of illusion. But Butler's apparent calm in this stage of life suggests that he has already completed the most difficult task, releasing the need to be what others expect. This is not resignation. It is perspective. After decades in an industry that constantly measures worth through visibility and physical performance, choosing peace over constant validation is a quiet form of power. It reflects a shift from external approval to internal balance. Time, in this sense, becomes an ally rather than an enemy. The same years that soften physical intensity sharpen awareness. Butler's journey illustrates that survival is not merely about continuing to work, but about continuing to exist without being consumed by the past. He is no longer chasing the peak that once defined him, because he understands that peaks are temporary by design. Audience resistance to this idea reveals a broader cultural problem. Modern entertainment rarely teaches people how to age. Youth is marketed as the only phase worth documenting, while everything beyond it is framed as loss. This leaves viewers emotionally unprepared to witness natural change, especially in figures they once idealized. The sadness they feel is not inevitable. It is learned. What makes Butler's current phase meaningful is its ordinariness. There is no dramatic collapse, no scandal, no heroic final stand. There is simply continuation. In a media environment obsessed with extremes, continuity feels unsettling because it lacks narrative climax. Yet, for real human lives, continuity is the goal. By refusing to dramatize his own aging, Butler unintentionally challenges the audience to do the same. He does not demand sympathy or nostalgia. He simply exists as he is, allowing Time to leave its marks without apology. That posture is far more instructive than any motivational speech or emotional montage. In the end, the question is not what happened to Gerard Butler at 55. The more honest question is, why do we struggle so much to watch people change? Butler's story offers a quiet answer. Change is not the enemy. Denial is. When myths fall away, what remains is not something to mourn, but something to understand. Letting go of the myth does not diminish the past. It places it in context. Gerard Butler's legacy does not end with youth, nor does it depend on tears. It endures through acceptance of Time, of Liametz, and of the enduring strength found in moving forward without illusion. As the conversation around Gerard Butler at 55 reaches its conclusion, what ultimately emerges is a need to redefine success itself. In a culture dominated by youth, speed, and spectacle, success is often measured by visibility and physical dominance. When those elements inevitably fade, the narrative quickly turns pessimistic. Butler's life at this stage challenges that framework by presenting an alternative standard, one grounded in integrity, continuity, and self-awareness. Hollywood rarely rewards moderation. Actors are encouraged to maximize output, capitalize on peak demand, and delay aging through relentless transformation. Butler once participated fully in this system, subjecting his body to extreme regimens to meet the expectations attached to his eye image. Over time, however, the cost of maintaining that standard became undeniable. Continuing down that path would have meant sacrificing long-term health for short-term validation. Choosing otherwise was not a retreat, but an assertion of control. At 55, Butler's career is no longer defined by proving his strength to others. Instead, it reflects an understanding of limits, physical, psychological, and professional. In many ways, this understanding represents a higher form of discipline. Knowing when to stop pushing is more difficult than knowing how to push harder. It requires clarity, humility, and a willingness to disappoint those who demand repetition of the past. This stage of his life also exposes how poorly society handles male aging. While women are often openly scrutinized for visible change, men are subjected to a subtler but equally damaging expectation. They must remain formidable. When that aura diminishes, admiration can quickly turn into pity. Butler's experience illustrates how narrow that definition of male worth remains. Strength is still assumed to be physical, despite evidence to the contrary. Yet, Butler's continued relevance suggests that audiences are capable of adjustment, even if media narratives lag behind. He still attracts viewers, not because he embodies invincibility, but because he brings familiarity and credibility. These qualities are earned over time and cannot be fabricated. They are the residue of years spent working, adapting, and enduring. There is also a lesson in the absence of drama. Butler has not framed his aging as a struggle for public consumption. He has not attempted to rebrand it as a heroic battle against Time. Instead, he has allowed it to unfold without spectacle. This refusal to perform vulnerability or decline on demand deprives sensational storytelling of its fuel, forcing observers to confront a quieter reality. Ultimately, Gerard Butler at 55 represents a form of success that rarely trends online. It is the success of remaining functional, autonomous, and intact in an industry designed to exhaust its participants. It is the success of understanding that relevance does not require constant reinvention, nor does it demand eternal youth. In closing, the emotional narratives that invite audiences to mourn Butler's present are based on a flawed premise, that aging negates achievement. His life suggests the opposite. Aging contextualizes achievement. It avoids the tragedy of excess by making room for sustainability. If there is meaning to be drawn from his story, it is not in tears or nostalgia, but in recalibration. Gerard Butler did not lose high himself with age. He refined high himself. In a world that equates fading youth with failure, that refinement may be his most enduring accomplishment. The conversation about Gerard Butler at 55 ultimately extends beyond cinema, celebrity, or even aging itself. It becomes a reflection of how individuals relate to TMA, identity, and self-worth. Public figures merely accelerate this confrontation by aging in front of millions. What audiences see in Butler is not an exception, but a preview of a universal process that everyone must eventually face. For much of his career, Butler's identity was externally reinforced. Applause, box office numbers, and cultural attention validated the version of high himself the world preferred. This is not unique to fame. In quieter ways, many people construct their own identities around performance, professional success, physical ability, or social relevance. When those foundations shift with age, injury, or circumstance, the question becomes painfully familiar. Who am I without what once defined me? Butler's current phase offers an instructive answer. Rather than disappearing or desperately reclaiming an outdated version of high himself, he has allowed his identity to expand beyond peak performance. This choice is subtle but powerful. It suggests that self-worth can survive change when it is not entirely dependent on external affirmation. Aging, in this sense, becomes less of a threat and more of a test of internal alignment. Audience reactions reveal how difficult this lesson is to absorb. Many viewers interpret change as erosion, because they have been conditioned to believe that value is front-loaded in life. Youth is marketed as potential. Everything afterward is framed as decline. Butler's continued existence disrupts that narrative. He has not been erased by Time. He has been reshaped by it. There is also an emotional honesty in his trajectory. He does not attempt to present himself as teamless or immune to reality. This refusal to deny age creates discomfort, but it also creates credibility. In a culture saturated with artificial preservation, authenticity stands out precisely because it is rare. Butler's aging is visible, and that visibility becomes its own quiet statement. Importantly, his story highlights the difference between relevance and meaning. Relevance is transient and externally granted. Meaning is cumulative and internally sustained. Butler may no longer dominate pop culture conversations, but his career holds meaning because it reflects endurance rather than novelty. This distinction matters far beyond entertainment. Many people chase relevance long after it has stopped serving them, mistaking attention for purpose. The emotional manipulation embedded in try not to cry narratives thrives on avoidance. They encourage audiences to grieve an imagined loss instead of learning from transformation. Butler's reality offers a more constructive alternative. Accept that identity evolves, and that evolution does not negate what came before. It integrates it. As viewers project their own fears onto Butler, they are offered an opportunity. They can either mourn the passing of youth or reconsider what growth looks like after it. His life does not provide a dramatic moral lesson, but it does model a sustainable one: continue, adapt, and remain intact. In the end, Gerard Butler at 55 is less a subject than a mirror. What people feel when they see Chaim says more about their relationship with Tima than about his circumstances. Aging exposes illusions, but it also clarifies priorities. Butler's journey suggests that while youth fades, coherence does not have to. Beyond the screen, the true significance of his story lies in its ordinariness. There is no collapse, no redemption arc, no tragedy. There is simply a man moving forward. And in a world obsessed with exceptionalism, that quiet persistence may be the most relatable and valuable lesson of all.